Now, citizen involvement is not easy. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes interest. We must make time. Our children are our most valuable assets, whether you're talking to the parent or the community. Children represent the future, and therefore we collectively need to be intimately involved with their education. We have to have a return to American and Tennessee values.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brandon Lewis, founder of the Tennessee Conservative, the volunteer state's largest conservative news alternative. Today, John Ragan, state representative for District 33 in Anderson County, joins me. John is a retired Air Force fighter pilot. I mean, he would make those guys in Top Gun look like a bunch of amateurs. I've seen him. Sometimes he buzzes my house just for fun. He recently, he received his master's in aeronautical sciences at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. He is the chair of the Government Operations Committee and serves on various other educational committees. Representative Ragan is here today to discuss Tennessee colleges' attempts to radicalize the meaning of Title IX with the help of Joe Biden's woke administration, among other educational issues affecting our educational systems in Tennessee. Representative Ragan, welcome to the program. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. Always glad to talk to the people of Tennessee.
Awesome. Well, for our viewers who may not know, explain exactly what Title IX is. I think we need to start there.
Title IX is the most commonly used name for the federal civil rights law in the United States that was enacted as part of the Education Amendments of 1972. It prohibits sex-based discrimination in any school or any other education program that receives funding from the federal government. Title IX specifically states, and this is a quote, "No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance." Title IX applies to schools, local and state educational agencies, and other institutions that receive federal money from that department. These recipients are approximately 17,600 local school districts. And I'll mention that we have 147 school districts in Tennessee, all of which get some of this money. It also includes over 5,000 post-secondary institutions, which is to say colleges, universities, and technical schools, as well as some charter schools and for-profit schools. Occasionally, you have to include libraries and museums in that as well. There are also, for that matter, vocational rehabilitation agencies and education agencies, the district in the 50 states and districts of Columbia that get this money from the United States.
So that sounds all very straightforward. You shouldn't be discriminated if you're a male or a female. But how is the federal government trying to reinterpret Title IX to push a leftist agenda in our schools? And what court actions have recently happened to check that?
Well, a little bit of history here. Back in 2016, actually, before that even, the Department of Education under the Obama administration issued something they called the Dear Colleague letters, which were aimed at the colleges and universities across the nation. And in these Dear Colleague letters, they said that, well, the word sex as it was used in the 1972 law now means, or it includes sexual orientation and gender identity, etc. Now, of course, in 1972, those terms were known only to people studying psychology. They were certainly not the intent of the drafters or framers of that law. However, the Department of Education tried to say, well, yes, they are. Tennessee, among other states, filed court action against the Obama administration, and it got to the Sixth Circuit Court in 2016. Then an election happened, and the Trump administration took over. And within a month of his inauguration, they removed all of that guidance. And so the Sixth Circuit said, your court case is moot. In other words, there's nothing to sue about. And from that point on, it was a dead issue until just recently, again, the Department of Education, this time under the Biden administration, is trying to say that sex includes sexual orientation and gender identity. And they published this time, they changed the name of it. Under the other administration, the Obama administration, they called it a Dear Colleague letter. They're now calling it a Dear Educator letter. But essentially, it was the same approach, saying, well, you have to interpret that word in Title IX to include gender identity and sexual orientation. That, again, stuck in the craw of a lot of people. And Tennessee, along with 19 other states, again filed suit. And this time a judge in East Tennessee who heard the case enjoined / restricted, restrained, whatever word you want to use there, the U.S. Department of Education from enforcing anything in that letter. From that standpoint, the issue that we're dealing with in this situation is that with that court action in place, they have to follow the law as it existed prior to the Obama administration, et cetera. And that means basically that the word sex means biological male, biological female. That said, a number of our institutions in Tennessee, and for that matter across the nation, were still afraid they were going to lose federal funding. So they rushed to implement wording that matched that the Department of Education's wording in their letter. And some people wrote me about that and wanted to know if that was legal. So I did some research and talked to the lawyers that support the General Assembly. And they said, no, it's not. So I drafted letters to all of the 11 universities in our state that are supported by the state. That includes the University of Tennessee system, which is 5 different campus locations, as well as 6 of what we call LGIs, or locally governed institutions. Locally governed institutions examples are like the East Tennessee State University, Middle Tennessee State University, Austin Peay University, Tennessee State, and so forth. They do not come under the administration of President Boyd, who is the president of the UT system. But letters went to all of them over my signature, reminding them that that court injunction was in place and for them to follow state law. That situation also required them, that letter required them to respond back to me saying that they were indeed following state law. Now, I had done my homework before I sent the letter, and I knew that some of our institutions were in fact following state law, but some weren't. And so the letter was sent to everybody, but I was interested primarily in getting responses from those that were not following state law.
And I'm sure that the corporately held left-leaning media in Tennessee reported it straight down the middle and all the facts, and they didn't try to make you look bad because you did something conservative and ethical and honest. We only have 2 conservative media outlets in the state. Mine's the only one that exclusively focuses on Tennessee, and our coverage is a lot more in depth. That's why I wanted to have you on here, so that we could get you to some conservatives so they don't have to read those left-leaning rags that lie about things continually under the guise of being independent in their way of thinking. So what did the press do? What did they say? What did the universities say? Just kind of give us a rundown.
Well, let's start with the universities. Amazingly, they all wrote back and said they were in compliance. However, I will point out one, which I won't name, was changing their website and their policies right up to literally just a few hours before the response deadline. But they did get it changed. Now, of course, I'm still checking, again, doing my homework on some others to make sure that it's changed. That said, I'm going to take them at their word for right now, because there's another letter that I sent earlier this week on that issue again. But as far as the press is concerned and how they reported it, apparently there was, shall we say, a little bias. And as a result, I got a lot of hate-filled emails and vulgarity-laden phone calls from people who were accusing me of taking away rights from the LGBTQ plus whatever, the alphabet mafia, if you will. And, you know, I was a very unfit human being. Now, that said, of course, what I did, I just explained, was just ask universities to follow the law and point out to them there was a court case that delineated that. Several of these people didn't want to hear that, though. I think the attitude that they had was, my mind's made up, don't confuse me with the facts.
Well, that is often the case. And we have, one reason the condition of education is in Tennessee, both at the primary and the secondary level, is because of low information voters. And they're everywhere. And we try to bring all of our subscribers are high information voters because we cover state government extensively. What can the Tennessee legislature do to stop these left-leaning institutions that survive off conservative tax dollars? And Representative Ragan, this is like one of my biggest things I don't understand. While we take conservative taxpayer dollars as Republicans and we funnel them into left-leaning indoctrination camps that continually inflate their expense with administration and bloat, they are completely contrary in their viewpoints. Most of them, even the major administrators and the presidents. And we recently did something with John Saylor about all the critical race theory and SEL and everything else that's being required to even hire people in Tennessee universities. What can we do to keep them from pushing these divisive and destructive ideologies? And why do Republicans seem to be, to use a military analogy, they seem to be like, it's almost like they're sending checks to the opposing army's munitions plant so they can build and weaponize their own citizens to fight against them. It's just been a very curious thing to observe how Republicans support higher education when they don't support conservative values. Well,
a bit of a conundrum exists there in some places, you're correct. But we must be careful now not to paint with too broad a brush, because a university is a collection of colleges. For example, the University of Tennessee has the College of Agriculture, the College of Engineering, the College of Architecture, the College of Education, and so forth and so on. And those colleges, like, for example, we'll pick on the hard sciences like engineering or architecture, they're more about teaching their students how to become engineers and architects or veterinarians or whatever, as opposed to indoctrination. Now, that's not to say some of that doesn't creep in, but our state needs engineers. We need doctors. We need veterinarians. So we have to have a supply of those valuable skill sets that those universities turn out. Additionally, we need teachers. And I will point out too, my daughter's a teacher, and I myself have been involved in education for a number of years. So not all teachers are of the woke variety. Unfortunately, there's enough that are, and they're the ones that get the press and send the nasty emails and other things, that it gives the impression that our entire education system is that way. Now, at the K through 12 level, that's not so. There's enough of them like that, mind you. But there's also more than just a few that object to that in the K through 12 system. At the university level, I think the staff, unless they have tenure, and sometimes even if they have tenure, are afraid to stand up to their peers for fear they're going to be excluded, excommunicated, if you will, from the system. In fact, that has happened in several places across the country. There have been, if you follow the press, a number of lawsuits filed by professors who suffered adverse action because they stood up for conservative principles like freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And actions were taken against them by the administration. In some cases, the administration was acting on complaints from their colleagues. From that standpoint, we have to have a return to American and Tennessee values. That is to say, the things that our country was founded on, the Judeo-Christian values that have brought us for over 2 centuries to become the most powerful, most prosperous country in the world, and for that matter, in history. Those values have served us well, and if we adhere to them, they will continue to serve us well. We must stop those people who would, through deceit and subterfuge, try to take those values and discard them and force the rest of us to follow their own bent ideology, most of the time Marxism.
So just one thing while we're on education, I know you serve on a lot of education committees, so it must be something you really care about. And obviously here you are, government operations. I don't know what percentage of our budget goes to education. I mean, it's over 50%, isn't it?
Well, between our healthcare and education, yes, over 50%. Those two eat up well over half of our state budgets. Education is, of course, split into two categories, the K through 12 and higher education. And K through 12 gets the lion's share, I think, as it should, because our Constitution specifies it. But at the current time, for example, we have between 9 and 10 billion, that's with a B, dollars going through to our K through 12 system. Every Tennessee taxpayer is contributing to that. And as a result, in my mind, every Tennessee taxpayer deserves to have a product out of our K through 12 system that is a good citizen, productive to our society. In college levels, the output's a little tougher to define because the students themselves are also the customers as well as the taxpayers. But for colleges to offer degrees that are worthless, the equivalent of underwater basket weaving, if you will. I mean, sure, we need some graduates that come out of college with a PhD in philosophy or a bachelor's in philosophy, but I would question how many we really need as a society. And if we have paid for those people through student loans and grants, things like Tennessee Promise, then the taxpayer is entitled to ask, what are we getting for our money? And these institutions that are turning out these people with degrees that are unemployable or underemployed in many cases, they're doing a disservice to those individuals, to themselves, and most importantly, to the people that I represent, the Tennessee taxpayer.
Guys, if our publication ever goes away and you can't find us, it would be because if you're in the 96% that consume our content for free but do not give, we need your help. TennesseeConservativeNews.com/support. When you give any amount, you will get 2 bumper stickers sent to you along with my heartfelt appreciation and a signed letter. Proud Tennessee Conservative bumper sticker. Put that on your car. And also, Don't California My Tennessee bumper sticker. These, if you press these to the forehead of a liberal, it will leave third-degree burns all over their forehead, and it will engraven on their head, Don't California My Tennessee, lest they be confused. And we will send you this directory, which hopefully will be updated pretty soon. And if you give $50 or more, or a $10 recurring donation or more, you will get this proud Tennessee Conservative tumbler. Oh my goodness, it is like drinking. It is like drinking from the chalice in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. All wisdom will come to you, all conservative wisdom. And should you be able to trick a liberal or a leftist or a rhino into drinking out of this cup, they will immediately be red-pilled and conservative. It has magical properties. TennesseeConservativeNews.com/support. We just need your help, guys. Don't make me do this. Don't make me do this by myself. One of the biggest problems we have in conservatism is, it's just true, conservatives often give conservatively, liberals give liberally, because there's not a lot of money in protecting freedom. If there were more conservatives paying attention, if there were more conservatives actually giving and donating to conservative causes and organizations, you wouldn't have to deal with all this. But because we're so thinly funded, they can slap us around a little bit. But guess what? We got something they don't have, and that's the truth. And the truth carries farther. So we need your resources. Let me ask you this while we're on education. Now, I grew up in a house with a daddy that couldn't read or write. I understand thoroughly what illiteracy can do to a family, especially when the heads of the household suffer from it. Right now, our kids can only read at a third, like third of them reading at grade level, and it's approaching grade level, which is kind of that's a weird term. Either you are or you aren't. Masteries in the single digits in math and English and reading. We were promised school choice. I mean, that's one thing that Governor Lee campaigned on. And I live in an area that is so rough. John, we just moved up to Signal Mountain. We still private school, but I was living in an area that was so rough, like they didn't have a single kid to get an ACT score out of the high school that would have gotten them into a college. There's gang violence. I could not send my kids there. I have presently 0 school choice in my life, and I've paid in as a small business owner for 20 years into the system. And right now, we've only got like a few hundred kids in Nashville and Memphis that have school choice or we've had, I think it's like 60 some odd, or have about 600 applications. I think only maybe as of our last article, 70 or so had been approved. When can we get real school choice? We did a survey of like 2,000 something conservatives, which is bigger than any of these statewide surveys you see reported in the broadsheets. And it's like 90 some odd % wanted school choice. Republicans have been in charge for a long time now. The Democrats aren't to blame. When are we going to see like opportunity, like real opportunity? Because we had school choice bills die in the legislature at Republican hands this last time.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
And I'm just like, I mean, if it's all about the kids, and if the kids are in a bad situation, if they were in an abusive home, we'd get them out of the home first, figure out how to fix the home later. Well, they're in these abusive situations where 13 years later, they get turned out functionally illiterate. They're in a bad situation, but we don't get the kids out. We just keep coming up with some new formula. We come up with some new program. We put Penny Schwinn on a bus and she drives around and takes pictures with educators. Meanwhile, the kids still can't read and write. And so it just bothers me. And it seems like a moral failing that we have not gotten these kids out of these failing schools. I understand people want to preserve the system, but sometimes the system's so broken it can't be preserved. And I apologize for rambling, but it's a big concern of mine. And I know it's a big concern of parents.
Well, you're absolutely right. And of course, while school choice is certainly something that I have been pursuing personally, and a number of my colleagues have, in our political system, no single individual, and this is probably our strength as well as our weakness, no single individual can implement change, even change for the better. We have to have a good solid majority to do that. Additionally, beyond that, in our state, in the state of Tennessee, every bill that we file has to have something called a fiscal note associated with it that's put out by our finance assessment group. In other words, if this bill passes, this is what it will cost the taxpayers. And so many bills that are actually really good ideas die because of the fact that they're too costly. Now, what is too costly? Well, most of the time it has to do with what we can negotiate with the governor to put in his budget to cover it. That said, though, the school choice issue has got a lot of opposition, and it's very organized opposition from teachers' unions, to name one group. But there are other people besides those teachers' unions that have got the idea that school choice means that their tax dollars are going to go to schools or types of schools that they object to. Some of these people would say, well, I don't want my money going, my tax dollars going with a student who goes to a religious school. Now, of course, if you look at the GI Bill as a way of comparison, in the GI Bill, any veteran who wants to use this GI Bill to go to college can do so at any college that is accredited. That is to say, there's associations out there that grant accreditations to these colleges on the basis of the strength of their academic program. Well, if we have a similar accreditation program for our high schools, and in fact we do, if the school itself is accredited, then I don't think that anybody should object if that school is turning out, like I said, a good citizen, productive graduate. Now, and by the way, these schools, all of them, have to produce the same test results. That is to say, nobody escapes taking the tests that they're statewide. Nobody escapes having to meet the state standards. All those standards, even in private schools that are accredited, have to be met. Whether it's a school board, a public school board setting that, or a corporation that runs a charter school, which, by the way, is a state school, public school, the criteria still have to be met. So I'm a little at a loss to understand why people object on that basis, but they do. And unfortunately, there's enough of them that influence enough votes in the legislature to keep these things from getting through. As far as how to cure that, well, you ask what people should do. And the answer straightforwardly is be in touch with your government. And I don't just mean state legislators like myself. I mean state school boards, the state school board and local school boards. Local school board members are the lowest level, or the level closest to the people, I would maybe use that term, of elected officials. And the theory is, if they're the closest to the people, they would most accurately reflect the people's will. Regrettably, and I sincerely mean that, until the COVID situation hit, we had parents who didn't know what was going on in their school system. and they were content. Their attitude was, well, nobody's complaining. I must have a good school system for my kid. However, when COVID hit and the online learning started, and parents had the opportunity to see firsthand what their children were being taught as good state-sponsored education, they became concerned. And I'm grateful for that. I personally would like to see more parent involvement. And again, the way that happens is parents should be communicating with their school board members. And of course, going to school board meetings is one way to do that. I think nearly every school board meeting, if not all of them, have a public comment period. Parents can bring up issues that concern them at that time. And they also all have emails. They all have post office boxes. So there's ways to communicate with them besides just going to the meetings. The issues that you have and the question that you ask are straightforwardly addressed by citizen involvement. Now, citizen involvement is not easy. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes interest. And sometimes I confess, earlier in my life when I was in the military, I spent a lot of my time doing my job and did not have the time I felt to be involved with my school boards wherever I was stationed. That's a mistake. Straightforwardly, I'll be honest with you. We must make time. Our children are our most valuable assets, whether you're talking to the parent or the community. Children represent the future, and therefore we collectively need to be intimately involved with their education. Now, let me say again, I'm not disparaging teachers. We have a great many that have answered the calling, and teaching is truly a calling because there's not enough money in it for somebody to get in it to get rich on. But that calling sometimes is a bit fractured, if you will, because they go to these teachers' colleges and the teachers themselves get indoctrinated, and they would think that's the way it's supposed to be. They think they're supposed to pass that indoctrination on. I carried a portion of a bill. In fact, we carried the first funding reform for K through 12 education in our state this last year in 30 years. We switched from something called a resource model to a student needs-based model, something we should have done decades ago. That said, that funding model is only part of it because it's funding, it's not spending. The school boards are the spending entities in this equation. And again, citizens, not just parents now, parents are not the only ones whose tax dollars go to the schools. So our citizens, to include parents, should be involved with our school boards. It's a sad comment that sometimes people who want to get into politics figure they get into the lowest level, which is the school board, and they're more interested in politics than they are education. Now, that's not true for most of them. Don't misunderstand me. It's not a damning indictment, but it is true for enough of them to make that a problem. The other thing is that a great many school boards are populated by teachers, retired teachers, administrators, retired administrators, or by employees from large companies that can afford to give their employees time off to be involved in schools. So those who are left, who have to go to work on a daily basis and put in 8 or 10 hours at work, and then come home and take care of the family and the mowing the grass or fixing the meals or whatever else is involved, frankly, just run out of time to be able to do that. That's a problem, and it's one that has to be fixed at the citizen level. We in the state legislature would love to be able to mandate you citizen, you must go to a school board meeting. But that would fly in the face of our Constitution, for one thing. And for another one, probably have bad results, because making somebody do something they don't want to is a guarantee to make it turn out wrong.
Yeah. Well, we did a lot of that during COVID. And it took a long time for folks to realize that it was wrong. A few comments. Number one, the teachers union supported 10 candidates in the Republican primary. And do you know how many of those won?
No, I'm sorry, I don't.
One.
That's not surprising to me.
9 of the 10. So when everybody up in the House quakes when the unions and tell them what to do, they ought to realize that they're batting 10% in the primaries, and you can't get in there if you don't win your primary. And on the testing, I know that they were supposed to roll out scorecards, grades for all the school system, and for the third year in a row, Penny Schwinn says, "Oh, we don't have enough information to grade the schools." And I'm like, the information's out there, but it's hard to get to. It doesn't make a lot of sense. You have to be nerdy like me and research it and see that, okay, only 10% of the kids in our school can actually read and write at grade level. In the urban areas, it's abysmal. And then finally, the fiscal note, at the private Christian school that I send my kid to, it's $6,000, maybe $7,000 a year. There are 8 kids in a classroom. We got one administrator with an assistant. The test scores are through the roof. There's tons of parental involvement. It's half the cost of what the state spends, just about. It seems like there would be a negative fiscal note for school choice, like a negative one, like a benefit to the state. But you got to fund the government job factories, I suppose, and they are entrenched. But I just worry for the kids, Representative Ragan, because I'm glad there's a new funding formula out there. But if I had to put $100,000 on the table, that funding formula is going to increase the reading and the academics in Tennessee in 10 years from now, I'd put that bet on the table, and I'd put it to any administrator and any state rep, because I don't think it's going to make much of a difference, because I think the system's fundamentally broken. We keep pouring money into this thing. It's like an old beat up Chevy. It's like, the cost of repairing it's more than the payments would be on a new car, but we just keep putting the money into it and expecting it to be a new car one day, and it's the same old car year after year. You've been very kind with your time. I appreciate the work you do on education, and especially a lot of the reforms that you push through as it relates to obscenity and things of that nature in schools, and a lot of divisive concepts. And I know Carol Swain speaks highly of you and the work that you've done there. We appreciate the reforms that you're pushing. And if we can ever help you with our publication to reform education even more, because God knows it needs it, we'll be here to do that. You've been kind with your time, as I mentioned. I'll give you the last word.
Well, thank you very much. And I do appreciate the compliments. And quite frankly, one of the things that's required for the reform to succeed is for enough of our fellow citizens at every level, but especially at what I call the foot soldier level. That's the people with the kids in the schools and the people who are paying for those schools. We have to have that involvement. I can't overstress that. I have carried bills, in fact, just this last spring, to create more of that reform you were talking about. Boys play boys in sports at the K through 12 level, and another one for college level. And those are the kinds of reforms that shouldn't have to be done with legislation, and shouldn't have a need for it, to be honest with you. That said, what needs to happen, quite honestly, is the citizens pay attention to their government. Now, I get a lot, and I can't say that with enough emphasis, I get a lot of emails from those who disagree with the reforms that I pushed. But for those who agree with them, I guess the attitude is, well, everything's going the way I want it to, so I don't need to say anything. That's true to a degree. But also, you need to be involved enough to say, I like what's going on with this reform. We want more of it, or we want it done this way. And I will tell you up front that, like most of my colleagues, now, there's a few bad apples in every situation, to include even the legislature. Fortunately, it's only a few. Most of us are down there. We don't get rich. We're even more poorly paid than school teachers. But most of us are down there to try to do the right thing for our state. And the way we come up with what the right thing is we campaign. I put my positions out there in front of the public, and I assume that if people vote for me to go into office, my campaign positions are something they agree with. That's what I call black and white. There aren't that many black and white issues. There's just one way of a lot of gray ones. And so for the gray issues, I, like all of my colleagues, need input from our constituents. And by the way, constituents go beyond just my district. I consider the entire state of Tennessee something I represent. And so from across the state, they're my constituents. And I think my colleagues have the same attitude. We genuinely want to do what's right for our state, but it's not an easy task. As you pointed out, sometimes doing the thing that we can see would be a good idea is just too expensive. And so how do we get around that? I've voted for every tax cut we've had, since I've been in office, and I will continue to do that. In fact, I've sponsored some of them. But on the flip side of that coin, tax cuts bring our state prosperity, but they also reduce the amount of things that we can spend money on because we just don't have that money. I think there's a balance to be had. I think we're there. Our state is the most physically stable state in the union, according to Forbes magazine. And that's because we manage our money wisely. But in so doing, we have to balance the needs, and education is one of those needs that has to be balanced. Our citizens need to be involved. And again, I cannot overemphasize that they need to be involved at the local school board level. That's where the rubber meets the road, as the saying goes. And no matter how many reforms that I or people in my position in the legislature push through, they're not going to be adequate if we don't have citizen involvement.
Well, that's a good way to end it. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here. You've taught me a lot. I'm sure you've taught our subscribers a lot. Thank you, Representative Ragan.
Thank you.
All right, guys, if you enjoyed this interview, if you care about your state government and what's going on, where you can affect it, not the clown show in Washington, D.C., but where you can sit down kneecap to kneecap and talk to your elected representatives, please do search for Tennessee Conservative wherever you get your podcast and or social media, and do go to TennesseeConservativeNews.com and hit that subscribe button. Until next time, I'm Brandon Lewis, signing off.